I've spent 15 years taking calls from the worst moments of people's lives, but nothing, could have prepared me for the sound of my father's voice screaming for help 10 years after I watched them lower his casket into the dirt. Listen up. I'm talking to you right now because I don't think I have much time left, and if you're hearing this, it's not an accident. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a lead dispatcher out of a small county in Ohio, just a regular woman, a mother, someone who thought she knew how the world worked. I thought when people died, they stayed gone. I thought the things we did in the dark stayed in the dark. I was wrong. Buddy, you need to hear this, and you need to hear it with your heart wide open, because the thin line between this world and the next is a lot more fragile than you think. It was a Tuesday night, about 3:14 in the morning. The graveyard shift has a way of wearing you down to your soul. It's just the hum of the servers, the glow of the 4 monitors in front of me, and the smell of burnt coffee that's been sitting in the pot since midnight. It was quiet. Too quiet. You know that kind of silence that feels heavy? Like the air is thick with something you can't see? That's how it felt in the dispatch center that night. I was sitting there, rubbing my eyes, thinking about my daughter's tuition and the creak in my floorboards at home, when the board lit up. One single 911 call. I hit the headset button, my voice practiced and professional. 911, what is the location of your emergency? At first, there was nothing but static. But it wasn't the kind of static you get from a bad cell tower. It sounded like wind rushing through a tunnel. It sounded like 1,000 whispers layered on top of each other. And then, through the noise, I heard it. A heavy, wet thud. The sound of something being dragged across a concrete floor. 911, can you hear me? Is this an emergency? I asked again, my heart starting to pick up a rhythm I didn't like. Folks, I want you to stop for a second. Before I tell you what came through that speaker, I need to know who is out there. I need to know I'm not just talking into the void. Where are you listening from tonight? Take a second and put your city and your state in the comments. I need to see the map of where this warning is landing. Because the darkness I'm describing, it doesn't care about borders. It doesn't care if you're in a big city or a trailer out in the woods. It's everywhere. The voice that came through next made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Sarah? Sarah, help me. He's taking me down. He's taking me back to the dark. My breath hitched. I forgot every protocol I'd ever learned. I forgot the CAD system, the recording software, the supervisor sitting 3 desks down. Because I knew that voice. I'd know it anywhere. It was gravelly, deep, and laced with the familiar tremor of a man who had spent 40 years smoking and 30 years drinking away his regrets. It was my father. Ray Miller. But my father died in 2016. I was in the room when he took his last breath. I felt his hand go cold in mine. I watched the funeral home van pull out of the driveway. Dad? I whispered, my voice cracking. I shouldn't have said it. I'm a professional, for God's sake. But the raw terror in that voice, it stripped me bare. Sarah, he's got me by the legs. The basement door won't open. It's so hot, Sarah, why is it so hot? I looked down at my CAD screen. The GPS coordinates were blinking, pinging off the local towers. The system was doing its job. It was triangulating the location of the call. I waited for the address to pop up, my hands shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the desk. When the text finally flickered onto the screen in bright, neon green letters, I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. 412 Maple Drive. My house. I was sitting 5 miles away at the station, but the call was coming from my own home. My house, where my kids were sleeping. My house, which didn't even have a basement when I bought it. Or so I thought. The sounds on the other end of the line became more violent. I heard the sound of fingernails clawing against wood. I heard a low, guttural growl that didn't sound human. It sounded like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. And underneath it all, my father was weeping. Not just crying, but the kind of weeping that comes from a soul that knows it's lost. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry for what I did. Tell them I'm sorry." "Dad, what are you talking about? Who has you?" I was shouting now. My supervisor, Miller, looked over at me, his brow furrowing. He started walking toward my station, but I waved him off. I couldn't let him hear this. I couldn't let anyone know. "The shadow man," my father screamed. The sound was so loud it distorted the audio. "He says the debt is due. He says I lied about the fire. Sarah, don't let him take me. I can see the flames under the door. They're not red, Sarah, they're black. The flames are black." I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My father was a complicated man. He was a good old boy in the eyes of the town, but at home, he was a storm. He had secrets. We all knew he had secrets. There was a fire back in the late 90s, a warehouse fire that killed 2 men. My father was the foreman. He was cleared of any wrongdoing, but he was never the same after that. He started drinking harder. He started talking to things in his sleep. And now, 10 years after his heart stopped, he was calling me from a basement that shouldn't exist in a house I owned, telling me the debt was due. I looked at the monitor again. The call was still active. 4:12, 4:13. The seconds were ticking by. I could hear him being dragged. Thump. 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 Each sound felt like a hammer hitting my own heart. "Sarah, listen to me," his voice dropped to a frantic whisper. "He's looking at me. He's got eyes like empty sockets filled with smoke. He says you're next. He says the bloodline is tainted because I didn't repent. I thought I had time. I thought I could just forget. But there is no forgetting. Everything is recorded. Every word, every lie, it's all written in the smoke." I stood up, knocking my chair over. My headset cord yanked my head back, but I didn't care. I needed to get home. I needed to see if my children were safe. But I was frozen by the sound of something else on that line. A third voice. It wasn't my father. It wasn't static. It was a voice that sounded like grinding stones, like the earth itself was opening up to speak. It didn't speak English, but I understood it perfectly. It said one word, over and over again, vibrating through the electronics of my headset until my ears started to bleed. "Mine. Mine. Mine. Sarah, pray," my father shrieked. It was the last thing he said. "Find the light. Find the..." The line went dead. Not a dial tone. Not a disconnect. Just silence. The kind of silence that exists in a vacuum. I stared at the screen. The call duration showed 6:06. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys and ran. I ignored Miller calling my name. I ignored the protocols. I dove into my Ford Escape and tore out of the parking lot, hitting 60 before I even left the driveway. The night air was freezing, but I was burning up. I kept seeing my father's face, not the way he looked at the end, frail and yellowed by sickness, but the way he looked when he was terrified. As I raced down the darkened back roads of our county, the trees seemed to lean in toward the car. The shadows cast by my headlights weren't acting right. They were stretching, reaching out for the tires. I felt like I was driving through a nightmare, like the fabric of reality was being unzipped right in front of me. I kept thinking about what he said. The flames are black. In all my years of church, sitting in those hard wooden pews as a girl, I'd heard the preachers talk about hell. I'd heard them talk about the outer darkness. I always thought it was a metaphor. I thought it was just a way to scare people into being decent. But sitting in that car, with the echo of my father's screams still ringing in my ears, I realized that we've been lied to. It's not a metaphor. It's a place. And it's a place that's closer than any of us want to admit. I turned on to Maple Drive, my tires screeching. My house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, looking perfectly normal. The porch light was on. My daughter's bike was lying in the grass. It looked like a slice of the American dream. But as I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine, I saw it. A faint, flickering light coming from the foundation of the house. A place where there were no windows. A place where there should have been nothing but solid earth. And then, I smelled it. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't sulfur. It was the smell of ancient, rotting things. It was the smell of a grave that had been opened after a century. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I reached for the door handle. I didn't know if I was going to find my father, or if I was going to find the thing that was dragging him. But I knew one thing for certain, the call I took tonight wasn't just a 911 echo. It was a summons. And the basement door was already open. My hand was frozen on that door handle, and for a second, I honestly thought about just backing out of the driveway and never looking back. I thought about driving until the gas ran out, just to get away from the smell of that rotting grave and that impossible light. But I couldn't. My kids were in there. My 13-year-old daughter, Chloe, and my 8-year-old son, Leo. They were sleeping in a house that was currently being invaded by a ghost or a demon, or maybe both. I'm telling you this right now, and I need you to listen with everything you've got. If you haven't already, you need to subscribe to this channel and make sure you're following this confession. I'm not saying that for me, I'm saying it because the world is getting darker, and people are walking around like they're blindfolded on the edge of a cliff. You need to stay until the very end of this, because what I'm about to tell you, what I found behind that basement door, it's a warning that most people don't get until it's too late. Most people only see the truth when their eyes are closing for the last time. Don't be one of them. Stay with me. Please. I pulled my hand back from the door and reached into the glove box. I grabbed my heavy-duty mag light, the one I keep for emergencies, and I stepped out of the car. The air on Maple Drive was dead. No crickets. No breeze. Just a heavy, suffocating stillness. I looked at the foundation again. That flickering light was coming from the side of the house, right where the hydrangea bushes were. I crept over there, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pushed the branches aside, and my breath caught. There was a window there. A small, rectangular hopper window, caked in dirt and cobwebs. But here's the thing, folks, I've lived in this house for 6 years. I've mowed this lawn, I've trimmed these bushes, I've painted the siding. There was never a window there. Not yesterday. Not ever. I leaned down, the smell of decay getting stronger, mixing with a scent like burning hair and old, stale copper. I wiped a patch of the glass clean with my sleeve and peered inside. I expected to see a dark crawlspace. Maybe some spiders, some insulation. But what I saw, it didn't make sense. It was a room. A deep, cavernous room that stretched far beyond the footprint of my house. It looked like an old industrial basement, the kind you'd see in a factory from the 1940s. Heavy iron pipes ran across the ceiling, dripping with a thick, black sludge. The walls were made of rough-hewn stone, and they were weeping. They looked like they were sweating blood. And then I saw the light. It wasn't a lamp or a flashlight. It was coming from a crack under a heavy wooden door at the far end of the room. It was that black fire my father had screamed about. It was a light that didn't illuminate, it cast shadows that moved on their own. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Thump. 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 The sound from the phone call. It was happening right below my feet. I bolted for the front door. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers feeling like lead. I finally got the lock to turn and I burst inside. The house was cold. Not AC is on, cold, but the heat has been sucked out of the universe, cold. I ran straight for the stairs, my boots thudding on the hardwood. I had to check on the kids. I threw open Chloe's door. She was fast asleep, her breathing deep and even. I checked Leo. He was tucked under his Star Wars comforter, snoring softly. They were safe. For now. But as I stood in Leo's doorway, I looked at the floor. In the middle of the hallway, right between their bedrooms, there was a seam in the floorboards. A seam that hadn't been there when I tucked them in at 9 o'clock. It was a perfect rectangle, about 3 feet by 6 feet. I knelt down and ran my hand over it. It was a trapdoor. A heavy, iron-ringed trapdoor, flush with the wood. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't just a haunting. This was an intrusion of another reality into mine. My father's sin, whatever he had done back at that warehouse, whatever lie he had told that cost those men their lives, it hadn't just followed him to the grave. It had stayed hungry. And now it was here, in my home, looking for the next generation. Sarah. The voice didn't come from the hallway. It came from under the floor. It was a whisper, but it sounded like it was being shouted from a mile away. Sarah, he's showing me the ledger. He's showing me the names. It was Dad. He sounded so tired. So broken. Dad? I whispered, putting my ear to the cold wood of the trapdoor. I signed it, Sarah. I signed the paper because I didn't want to lose the house. I let them blame the night watchman. I knew the wiring was bad, but I didn't say nothing. I watched them carry those boys out in bags, and I just went home and had a beer. I thought I was a good man. I thought as long as I provided for you, God would overlook the rest. But he doesn't overlook, Sarah. He sees everything. The shadow man, he's been waiting for me to stop running. I felt tears stinging my eyes. My father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the man who walked me down the aisle, was a liar. He was a man who had traded the souls of 2 others for a paycheck and a quiet life. And now, the shadow man, whatever demonic entity he had invited in through his silence, was collecting. How do I help you? I sobbed. Dad, tell me what to do. You can't help me, honey, he choked out. The door is shut. But you gotta save the kids. He wants the bloodline. He says a house built on a lie belongs to him. You gotta get them out, Sarah. You gotta get them to the... Suddenly, the floor beneath me buckled. Not like an earthquake, but like the house was gasping for air. The trapdoor didn't open, it melted. The wood turned into a viscous, tar-like liquid, and I scrambled back as a hole opened up in the center of my hallway. I looked down into the abyss. It wasn't the basement I had seen through the window. It was worse. It was a vision. I saw a field of gray ash under a sky that was the color of a bruise. Millions of people were walking in circles, their heads down, their shoulders slumped. They weren't screaming. That was the most terrifying part. They were just empty. They were wandering through a wasteland of their own regrets, looking for a way out that didn't exist. And standing over them were these things, these towering, spindly shadows with eyes that looked like burning magnesium. One of those things was standing right below the hole in my floor. It looked up at me. It didn't have a face, just a suggestion of features hidden behind a veil of smoke. But I felt its gaze. It felt like needles being pushed into my brain. It held up a hand, a long, clawed hand, and in its palm, It held a single, gold locket. My heart stopped. That was my mother's locket. The one I'd buried my father with. The thing began to climb. It didn't use a ladder. It just rose. It defied gravity, drifting upward through the hole in my hallway, the black smoke of its body curling around the doorframes of my children's rooms. No! I screamed. I grabbed my mag light and swung it at the shadow, but the metal just passed through the smoke like it was hitting a fog. The creature didn't even flinch. It just kept rising until it was towering over me, filling the hallway with the smell of death. I realized then, with a cold, piercing clarity, that I was completely powerless. My job, my strength, my goodness, none of it mattered. I was standing in front of a predator from the pit of hell, and I had no weapons. I had spent my life being spiritual, but not religious. I thought being a good person was enough. I thought God was just a vibe or a higher power that didn't really interfere. But as that shadow man reached out a clawed finger toward Chloe's door, I knew the truth. There is a war going on for our souls, folks. There is a real, literal enemy who wants to destroy everything you love because of the things you've hidden in your heart. Please, I gasped, falling to my knees. Take me. Leave them. Take me. The shadow man paused. It tilted its head, and for the first time, it spoke. It didn't use words, it used thoughts. It poured a memory into my mind, a memory I had buried deep. It was from 5 years ago. A call I had taken at work. A woman was being beaten by her husband. I was tired. I was annoyed. I was having a bad day. I didn't prioritize the call. I waited 5 minutes before dispatching the units. By the time they got there, the woman was in a coma. She died 2 days later. I never told anyone. I scrubbed the logs. I shifted the blame to a technical glitch. The shadow man hissed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. You are just like him, the thought burned into my mind. You are mine by right of the lie. The father, the daughter, and soon, the children. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was cold. So cold it burned. I looked up, and the creature was leaning over me, its face inches from mine. I could see the black flames dancing in the depths of its eyes. It was showing me my own end. I saw myself in that gray field of ash, walking in circles for eternity, carrying the weight of that woman's death and my father's lies. Jesus, I whispered. I don't know why I said it. I hadn't prayed in years. I hadn't been to church since I was a kid. But the name just felt like the only solid thing left in a world that was turning into smoke. Jesus, help me. The shadow man recoiled. It didn't disappear, but it let go of my shoulder. It let out a sound like grinding metal, a screech of hatred that made the pictures on the walls shatter. Jesus. I said it louder this time. I was screaming it. Jesus, save my kids. Save me. The light in the hallway changed. It wasn't the black fire anymore. A soft, white glow began to emanate from the walls, from the floor, from the very air itself. It wasn't blinding, but it was heavy. It felt like a physical weight, a pressure of pure, clean holiness that the shadow man couldn't stand. The creature retreated toward the hole in the floor, its smoke dissipating, its form flickering like a dying candle. It looked at me one last time, and I saw something I never expected to see in a demon's eyes. Fear. It plunged back down into the abyss, and the trapdoor slammed shut. The floorboards knit themselves back together. The smell of decay vanished, replaced by the scent of rain on hot pavement. I sat there in the dark, gasping for air, my body shaking so hard I couldn't stand. The house was silent again. The basement was gone. But I knew it wasn't over. I knew the debt hadn't been paid, it had just been delayed. And then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands slick with sweat. It was a text message. From a number I didn't recognize. The ledger is still open, Sarah. One name is missing. I looked up, and there, standing at the end of the hallway, was my father. He wasn't a shadow. He looked real. He looked like he did the day he died. But he was crying. He was pointing toward the kitchen. Look at the clock, Sarah, he whispered. Look at the clock. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and I walked to the kitchen. I looked at the digital clock on the stove. It said 3:14. The exact time the call had started. I looked out the window. My car was in the driveway. The lights were off. It was like the last 30 minutes hadn't happened. But I could still feel the cold where the shadow man had touched my shoulder. I could still smell the copper. And then, the phone in the kitchen rang. I didn't want to answer it. I wanted to run. But I knew I couldn't. I picked up the receiver. 911, what is the location of your emergency? A voice asked. It was my own voice. Sarah, the voice on the other end said, my voice, the one from the dispatch center. Is someone there? We're getting a ping from your house. I looked at the receiver in horror. I was on both ends of the line. I was the dispatcher, and I was the victim. And that's when I heard the basement door, the real one, the one that leads to the laundry room, slowly creak open. I stood there, frozen in my own kitchen, holding a telephone receiver that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My own voice, my professional, dispatcher voice, was echoing in my ear, asking if I was okay, while the real-life door to my basement creaked open with a sound like a dying man's last groan. This is the part where people usually tell you they woke up. They tell you it was a dream, or a panic attack, or a trick of the light. But I'm telling you right now, as God is my witness, this was as real as the floor beneath my feet. Listen to me, and listen close. If you're still here, if you're still watching this, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Do not wait. This isn't about numbers or likes, it's about making sure this warning reaches every soul it's meant for before the algorithm buries it. You need to stay until the very end of this story. I am telling you, what happened next in that kitchen is the reason you were led to this video today. There is a truth coming that is too important to miss, a truth that will determine where you spend forever. Don't turn away. Your life might literally depend on what I'm about to say. The basement door didn't just open, it exhaled. A gust of hot, soot-heavy air rolled out of the darkness, hitting me in the face. It smelled of scorched copper and old, wet insulation, the exact smell of a fire that's been put out but is still smoldering in the bones of a building. My kitchen, my beautiful, modern kitchen with the granite countertops and the subway tile, began to flicker. 1 second I was standing in my home, and the next, the walls were gone, replaced by rusted corrugated steel and massive, humming electrical transformers. I wasn't in my house anymore. I was inside the warehouse. The warehouse from 1998. I could see him. My father. He looked younger, his hair still thick and dark, wearing his greasy work jumpsuit with Ray stitched over the pocket. He was standing in front of a massive breaker box, his hand hovering over a lever. He looked terrified. His eyes were darting around the room, settling on 2 young men, boys, really, barely 20 years old, who were working on a piece of heavy machinery across the floor. Ray! Is it safe? One of the boys shouted over the hum. Did you check the grounding? I watched my father. I saw the sweat beads rolling down his neck. I saw him look at the clock. It was late. He wanted to go home. He wanted his overtime. He knew the wiring was frayed. He knew the inspection had failed 3 days ago. But he also knew that if he shut it down, the production line would stop, and his bonus would vanish. Yeah, my father yelled back, his voice cracking. It's fine. Flip the switch. I tried to scream. I tried to run to him, to grab his arm, to tell him that those two boys had mothers waiting for them, that they had entire lives ahead of them. But I was a ghost in this memory. I was just a witness. My father pulled the lever. The explosion wasn't loud. It was a sickening pop, followed by a hum that grew into a roar. A blue arc of electricity danced across the ceiling, finding the oily rags, finding the chemical drums, finding the two boys. I watched the fire climb the walls in seconds. I watched the panic in my father's eyes turn into something colder, something deadlier. He didn't run to help them. He didn't grab the extinguisher. He backed away into the shadows. He watched them fall, and then he turned and ran toward the emergency exit, making sure to trip the manual alarm on his way out so it would look like he tried to save them. The scene shifted, swirling like smoke in a gale. Suddenly, I was back in my kitchen, but I wasn't alone. The shadow man was there, standing by the open basement door. But he wasn't just a shadow anymore. He was wearing my father's jumpsuit. He had my father's face, but it was twisted, the skin peeling back like burnt paper to reveal the black flames underneath. The ledger, Sarah, the creature hissed. Its voice was a chorus of the two boys who had died in that fire. The ledger must be balanced. Sin isn't a mistake, Sarah. It's a debt. And your father ran out of time to pay it. I collapsed against the counter, my breath coming in ragged gasps. He's dead. He's been gone for 10 years. Why now? Why me? The creature stepped closer, and the temperature in the room dropped until I could see my own breath. Because you are the fruit of the tree. Because you carry the same rot. You think your silence is different than his? You think the woman you left to die in that hospital bed doesn't have a voice in this room? I felt a crushing weight on my chest. Every lie I'd ever told, every time I'd looked the other way, every moment of pride and hidden malice, it all came rushing back, physically manifesting as a dark, oily substance that began to seep out of my own pores. I felt like I was drowning in my own soul. Look up, Sarah, a different voice said. It wasn't the shadow man. It wasn't my father. This voice sounded like a trumpet, clear, piercing, and terrifyingly pure. I looked up, and the ceiling of my kitchen was gone. In its place was a sky of liquid gold, and standing in the center of my living room was a figure that made the shadow man look like a flickering match. It was a man, but he was 10 feet tall, clothed in a robe that looked like it was woven from lightning. He didn't have wings, but he radiated a power that made the very atoms of the house tremble. His eyes were like lamps of fire, and in his hand, he held a long, double-edged sword that glowed with a terrifying light. This wasn't the angel you see on Christmas cards. This was a warrior. This was a witness. The shadow man shrieked and retreated into the darkness of the basement, but the being of light didn't move. He looked down at me, and I felt like my entire life was being laid bare. Every secret thought, every hidden motive, every dark corner of my heart was illuminated. There was no hiding. There was no explaining it away. Sarah Jenkins, the being said, and the sound of my name felt like a judgment. The accuser is right. The dead is real. The blood of the innocent cries out from the ground. Your father's house was built on a foundation of sand and blood. And you have added your own stones to the wall. I'm sorry. I wailed, burying my face in my hands. I'm so sorry. Please, just make it stop. Sorry is the language of the caught, the being replied, his voice echoing with a terrible holiness. Repentance is the language of the broken. You weep because you are afraid of the fire, not because you love the truth. Do you not see? The 911 echo isn't a haunting. It is a mercy. It is the sound of a door closing for the last time. Your father is calling you from the place where there is no more time, Sarah. He is calling you to warn you that the shadow man is not a ghost, he is the warden. I looked toward the basement door. My father was there again, but he was small, withered, and translucent. He was reaching out to me, his face contorted in an eternal scream of regret. Behind him, I could see the vast, gray wasteland I'd seen before, the place of the outer darkness. It was a place where God wasn't. It wasn't a furnace of red flames, it was a void of absolute, soul-crushing isolation. It was the destination of everyone who decided they could be their own God, their own judge, and their own savior. He's taking me back, Sarah, my father cried. The time is up. He says the bloodline is his. The shadow man lunged from the darkness, his clawed hand wrapping around my father's throat. But he didn't stop there. He reached out his other hand toward me. One for the fire, one for the smoke, the demon laughed. I felt the cold wind of the abyss pulling at me. I felt my feet sliding across the kitchen floor toward that gaping black hole of a basement. I grabbed the edge of the counter, my fingernails breaking against the granite, but the force was too strong. It was the gravity of my own sin. It was the weight of every lie pulling me down to where I belonged. I looked at the being of light, standing there with his sword of lightning. He didn't move to help me. He just watched with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of eternity. Help me. I screamed at him. Why won't you help me? I am the witness, the being said solemnly. I cannot interfere with a choice that has already been made. You have chosen the darkness every day of your life, Sarah. You chose it when you lied. You chose it when you ignored the dying. You chose it when you made your own comfort your God. Why do you cry for the light now, when you have hated it for so long? The shadow man's fingers touched my ankle. The cold was so intense it felt like my flesh was shattering. I was halfway into the basement now. I could see the black flames below me. I could see the millions of souls wandering in the ash. I could see the end of my story. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't just want to be safe. I didn't just want to escape the pain. For the first time in my life, I saw my sin for what it actually was. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a declaration of war against the one who had created me. It was a slap in the face of the light. I am a wicked woman. I shrieked, the words tearing out of my throat like shards of glass. I deserve this. I deserve the basement. I deserve the dark. Oh God, I'm so sorry for what I've done to you. Forget about my life, just forgive me. Don't let me die hating you. The moment the words left my mouth, the gravity snapped. The shadow man let out a howl of such pure agony that my windows shattered. He was thrown back into the basement as if hit by a physical shockwave. The being of light stepped forward, and for the first time, he raised his sword. He didn't swing it at the demon. He swung it at the floor between me and the basement. The light from the blade was so bright I had to shut my eyes. There was a sound like a mountain collapsing, a roar of power that shook the very foundations of the earth. When I opened my eyes, the basement door was gone. The kitchen floor was solid wood. My father was gone. The shadow man was gone. But the being of light was still there. And he was looking at me with a look of such profound, heartbreaking pity that I couldn't even breathe. The debt is not gone, Sarah, he said softly. It is merely covered. For now. But the ledger is still open. He reached out and touched my forehead with a finger that felt like a coal of fire. You have been given a glimpse of the echo. You have heard the voice of the dead. Go now, and tell them what you saw. Tell them that the basement is real. Tell them that the shadow man is coming for the liars. And tell them that there is only one name that can close the door. He began to fade, his form dissolving into the morning light that was just beginning to peek through the kitchen window. "Wait!" I cried. "Who are you?" He looked at me one last time, and his eyes were no longer fire, but something deeper, something like an endless ocean of mercy. "I am the one who waited for your father to repent," he said. "And I am the one who will wait for you." "But Sarah, the clock is ticking." I stood alone in my kitchen as the sun rose over Maple Drive. My house was silent. My kids were still asleep upstairs. Everything looked normal. But I looked down at my ankle, and there, burned into my skin in the shape of a handprint, was a mark of soot and ash. I walked over to the phone. It was still off the hook. I picked it up, and for a second, I thought I'd hear the static again. But there was only a dial tone. I sat down at the table and began to write. I wrote down everything. I wrote down the name of the woman in the hospital. I wrote down the truth about the warehouse fire. I wrote down the names of the 2 boys. Because I knew that the 911 echo wasn't over. It was just getting started. And I knew that somewhere out there, right now, someone else was about to pick up a phone and hear a voice they thought was buried forever. The sun finally crested over the horizon, but it wasn't the kind of morning that brought hope. The light was pale and sickly, casting long, distorted shadows across my kitchen floor that made me jump at every flicker. I sat there at the table, my hand cramped from clutching the pen, staring at the pages of my own handwriting. I had spilled everything. I'd written down the name of the warehouse, the names of those boys, Caleb and Marcus, and the name of Martha Gable, the woman whose call I'd sidelined because I was too tired to care. I thought that putting it on paper would exorcise the demons. I thought the truth would set me free right then and there. But folks, let me tell you something about sin. It's not just a stain you can scrub off with a little bit of honesty. It's a debt, and the interest is compounded in eternity. I looked down at the ash-black handprint on my ankle, and I realized it wasn't fading. In fact, it was starting to throb. It felt like a hot iron was being pressed into my bone. The 911 echo wasn't a one-time glitch in the universe. It was a puncture wound in the fabric of my reality, and something was still trying to crawl through. I stood up, my knees buckling, and I knew I couldn't stay in that house. I had to go to the source. I had to find Martha Gable's daughter. I'd seen her name in the obituary 5 years ago, Elena. She lived just a few towns over in a place called Clear Creek. I didn't know what I was going to say. "Hey, I'm the dispatcher who let your mother die, and now your mother's ghost is calling me from a basement that doesn't exist?" She'd call the cops on me, and I'd be the one behind bars. But I had to do it. The being of light had told me the ledger was still open. And I could feel the shadow man's breath on the back of my neck every time I turned a corner. I went upstairs to check on Chloe and Leo one last time. They were finally stirring. Leo was rubbing his eyes, asking if I'd made pancakes. I looked at his innocent face, at his messy hair, and I felt a wave of absolute terror. He didn't know. He didn't know that his grandfather had traded his soul for a paycheck. He didn't know his mother was a coward. I kissed them both, told them I had an emergency at the station, and called my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, to watch them. "Sarah, you look like death warmed over," Mrs. Higgins said as she walked up the porch steps. She was a sweet old lady, a pillar of the local Baptist church, the kind of woman who always had a Bible verse for everything. "I'm fine, Ruth," I lied. The word felt like a hot coal in my mouth. "The Lord sees the heart, honey," she said, her eyes narrowing behind her spectacles. "Whatever's chasing you, you can't outrun it in a Ford. You can only outrun it at the cross." I didn't answer. I just got in my car and drove. The drive to Clear Creek felt like a descent into another world. The radio in my car started acting up. I'd tune it to a country station, and for a few seconds, it would be fine, just some song about heartbreak and whiskey. But then, the static would creep in. That same tunnel wind static from the 911 call. And through the noise, I'd hear the voices. Not just my father's. I heard Martha Gable. He's coming through the door, Sarah, her voice whispered through the speakers, sounding wet and ragged. Why aren't you sending the units? Why am I alone? I slammed my hand against the dashboard, trying to shut it off, but the radio stayed on even when I pulled the fuse. The car began to fill with that smell again, rotting graves and black smoke. I looked in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I didn't see the empty back seat. I saw the two boys from the warehouse fire, Caleb and Marcus. They were sitting there, their skin charred and peeling, their eyes replaced by those black, flickering flames. They weren't looking at me with anger. They were looking at me with a profound, hollow sadness. The debt, Sarah, they said in unison. Their voices sounded like the crackling of a furnace. The bloodline is tainted. I screamed and swerved, nearly hitting a telephone pole. I pulled over to the side of the road, gasping for air, my forehead resting on the steering wheel. I was losing my mind. I had to be. This was a psychotic break. It had to be. But when I looked down at my ankle, the handprint was glowing. A dim, sickly purple light was emanating from the soot. I looked out the window. I was parked right in front of an old, abandoned church. The steeple was crooked, the windows were boarded up, and the graveyard next to it was overgrown with briars and weeds. It looked like a place where God had been forgotten a long time ago. And standing at the iron gate of the graveyard was the Shadow Man. He wasn't a blur of smoke anymore. He was solid. He was wearing a suit that looked like it was made of funeral shrouds. He was tall, inhumanly tall, and he was holding a heavy, leather-bound book. The ledger. He didn't have a face, just a void where features should be, but I felt him smiling. I felt the cold triumph radiating off him. You can't pay it, Sarah, his voice echoed in my head, vibrating through my teeth. The price of a soul is higher than you can afford. Your father tried to hide. You tried to lie. But the echo always returns to the speaker. He opened the book, and as he turned the pages, I heard the sounds of thousands of 911 calls. Screams, sobs, the sound of car crashes, the sound of gunshots, the sound of the last breaths of the lonely. It was a library of human misery. Every word you spoke in secret, the Shadow Man hissed. Every heart you hardened. It's all here. Your name is written in the ink of your own blood. You belong to the basement, Sarah. You and the children. The line must be extinguished to satisfy the law. I felt the car start to sink. Not into the mud, but into the asphalt. The road was turning into that black, viscous tar again. The basement was opening up right there on Route 42. I tried to open the car door, but it was locked. The power locks were clicking over and over again, clack clack, clack clack, like a countdown. Jesus! I cried out. Jesus, help me. But this time, the being of light didn't appear. The sky stayed gray. The Shadow Man just laughed, a sound like dry bones rattling in a box. The light only answers the repentant, the demon said. You are still holding on to the lie, Sarah. You are driving to see Elena Gable not to seek forgiveness, but to ease your own conscience. You want to feel like a good person again. You want to earn your way out of the dark. But the dark owns you. He was right. I felt the truth of it like a knife in my gut. I was trying to save myself. I was trying to be my own savior. I was still playing the same game my father played, trying to manage the consequences instead of surrendering to the judge. The car was halfway submerged now. The black tar was up to the windows. I could see the faces of the lost pressing against the glass from the other side, thousands of them, their eyes wide with an eternal, silent scream. I saw my father among them. He was reaching for me, his fingers scraping against the window. "Don't come here, Sarah," he wailed, his voice barely audible through the glass. "Don't come to the basement. It never ends. The fire never goes out, and the worms never die. Repent. Truly repent." I looked at the shadow man. He was reaching for the door handle, his long, spindly fingers wrapping around the chrome. He was going to pull me down. He was going to take me to the place where the ledger is closed forever. "I give up." I screamed, the tears finally breaking loose. "I can't fix it. I can't pay it. I am a sinner, and I am lost. If you don't save me, Lord, then I am exactly where I deserve to be. I don't want to be a good person anymore, I just want to be yours. Take the debt. Take the ledger. Do whatever you want with me, just don't let the darkness have my soul." The shadow man froze. The air around the car began to vibrate with a frequency so high it made my teeth ache. The black tar beneath the tires stopped churning. And then, I heard it. It wasn't a voice. It was a sound. The sound of a hammer hitting a nail. Clang. The sound echoed across the graveyard, across the highway, across the very foundations of the earth. Clang. With every strike, the shadow man shriveled. He began to smoke, his shroud suit tearing away to reveal the pathetic, hollow creature underneath. The ledger in his hand burst into white flames, not the black flames of the basement, but a fire so pure it turned the leather to snow and the paper to light. Clang. The third strike hit, and the car was suddenly thrust upward, back onto the solid asphalt. The hole in the world slammed shut with a thunderclap that shattered the windows of the abandoned church. The shadow man was gone. The graveyard was empty. The radio was silent. I sat there, shaking, my chest heaving, as the pages of the burning ledger drifted through the air like glowing butterflies. They weren't black anymore. They were white. And as one of them landed on my dashboard, I saw the writing. It wasn't a list of my sins. It wasn't the warehouse fire or the ignored 911 call. Across the page, in a script that looked like it was written in gold, were 3 words. Paid in full. I sobbed. I put my head on the steering wheel and I cried until I thought my heart would stop. I wasn't crying out of fear anymore. I was crying out of a weight being lifted that I didn't even know I was carrying. It was the weight of 3 generations of lies, 3 generations of running, 3 generations of the 9/11 echo. But as I sat there, the silence was broken by a soft, rhythmic tapping on my window. I looked up, expecting to see a demon or a ghost. But it was a woman. She was wearing a simple floral dress and holding a basket of wildflowers. She looked familiar. I rolled down the window, the glass was cracked, but it still worked. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked. Her voice was gentle, like a cool breeze on a humid Ohio afternoon. I stared at her. My throat was dry. I think so. You looked like you were having a terrible dream," she said, reaching out to touch my hand. Her skin was warm. Real. I was just tending to my mother's grave. It's her birthday today. I looked past her, into the overgrown graveyard. There, nestled among the briars, was a clean, well-kept headstone. Martha Gable. 1958 to 2021. My heart skipped a beat. "You're Elena." The woman smiled, but there was a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Yes. How did you know my name?" I looked at the paid in full paper on my dashboard, but it was gone. It had vanished into the air. All that was left was the ash on my ankle, and even that was starting to flake away, revealing clean, pink skin underneath. "I'm Sarah," I said, my voice trembling. I worked. I worked the night your mother called. I came here to tell you something. I came here to tell you the truth. Elena's face went pale. She gripped the basket of flowers tighter. The truth? The police said it was a technical error. They said the call didn't go through because of the storm. No, I said, stepping out of the car. I stood on the solid ground, the real ground, and I looked her in the eye. It wasn't the storm. It was me. I ignored her. I was tired, and I was selfish, and I let her down. And I've been running from that moment ever since. I waited for her to scream. I waited for her to slap me, to curse me, to call me a murderer. And she would have been right to do it. But Elena didn't move. She just looked at me, and I saw a tear roll down her cheek. My mother was a woman of great faith, Sarah, she whispered. The last thing she said to me before the intruder came, she told me that no matter what happened, God was in control of the timing. She said that even the worst sins can be turned into a bridge if we let the Lord lead us. She reached into her basket and pulled out a single white lily. She handed it to me. I've hated the woman who took that call for 5 years, Elena said. I've carried that hate like a stone in my pocket. But today I think I'm ready to let it go. Because if the Lord can forgive what you did, who am I to hold on to it? We stood there in the shadow of that crooked steeple, two broken women in a broken world, and for the first time in my life, I felt that echo stop. The cycle was broken. The basement was sealed. But as I turned to get back into my car, I saw something that made my blood run cold all over again. On the back seat of my car, where the charred boys had been sitting, there was a small, plastic toy. It was a fire truck. A little red fire truck with a silver ladder. I picked it up, my hands shaking. I knew this toy. It belonged to Leo. He'd lost it months ago. I turned it over, and there, on the bottom, written in my father's unmistakable, shaky handwriting, were the words. It's not over, Sarah. Tell them about the flames. I looked back at the graveyard, but Elena was gone. The headstone was gone. The church was gone. I was standing in the middle of a field of black ash. The 911 echo wasn't a memory, folks. It wasn't a haunting. It was a test. And I realized with a jolt of pure, electric terror that I hadn't left the house. I was still in the basement. The ash, it was in my mouth. It was gritty, tasting of burnt iron and sulfur. I fell to my knees, and when I reached out to steady myself, my hands didn't hit the pavement of Route 42. They sank into a soft, gray powder that felt like ground-up bone. The beautiful vision of Elena, the white lily, the paid-in-full paper, it was all gone. It was a mirage, a trick played by my own desperate heart to keep me from seeing the truth. I was back in the basement. But it wasn't just my basement anymore. The walls had expanded until they disappeared into a horizon of thick, oily smoke. The iron pipes overhead were pulsing now, glowing with a dull, throbbing red light, like the veins of some gargantuan, subterranean beast. And the sound. God, the sound. It wasn't just static anymore. It was the 911 center. Every station, every headset, every line was open at once. I heard a chorus of 10,000 voices, all of them screaming for help, all of them at the moment of their greatest terror, and underneath it all, that rhythmic thump-thump-thump of something heavy being dragged across concrete. Sarah. The voice was right in my ear. I spun around, and there he was. The Shadow Man. But he wasn't tall and spindly anymore. He had grown. He was a towering pillar of darkness that seemed to suck the very light out of the air. He didn't need a face, his presence was a physical weight that crushed the air out of my lungs. You thought it was that easy, the demon hissed. The voice didn't come from his mouth, it vibrated inside my skull, shaking my very soul. You thought you could say a few words, shed a few tears, and the debt would just vanish? You thought you could walk away from the basement while the blood of the innocent is still wet on your father's hands and the smoke of your own lies is still in your hair? I tried to back away, but the ash was like quicksand, pulling at my shins. I repented. I asked for forgiveness. The shadow man laughed, and the sound was like the grinding of tectonic plates. You asked for escape, Sarah. You didn't ask for a new heart. You wanted the light so you could stop feeling the heat. But the basement is not a choice you make once, it is the destination of everyone who refuses to bow. Look at them, Sarah. Look at your brothers. The smoke parted, and I saw them. Not just Caleb and Marcus. Not just Martha Gable. I saw people I'd never met. I saw thousands of them, standing in the ash, their faces turned upward toward the glowing pipes. They were holding their own ledgers, heavy, black books that were chained to their wrists. Every time they tried to speak, only smoke came out. They were trying to call 911. They were trying to call for a rescue that would never come because they had spent their lives hanging up on the one who was calling them. This is the reality behind the veil, the shadow man whispered, his form looming over me. The 911 echo is the sound of the door locking from the inside. Your father is deeper in now. He's in the dark fire. Do you want to see him? Do you want to join him in the place where the fire is never quenched? I looked down, and the ash beneath me began to glow. Not with the light of the being I'd seen before, but with a deep, sickening violet. The floor was turning translucent. Below me, I saw levels, deep, jagged pits of shadow where things were moving. Things that had been waiting since the foundation of the world for the bloodline of the liars to fail. The debt must be paid, the shadow man roared, reaching down with a hand that was now made of black, jagged glass. If the father won't pay, and the daughter won't pay, then I will take the children. I will take Leo. I will take Chloe. They will be the new foundation for this house. No! I shrieked. I didn't care about my soul anymore. I didn't care about the ash or the fire. Take me. Kill me. Just leave them alone. Your life is not yours to trade, Sarah, a voice boomed. It wasn't the demon. It wasn't the witness. This voice was different. It didn't sound like a trumpet or a storm. It sounded like a father. Not my father, the liar, the coward. But a father who had been waiting in the hallway of my heart my entire life while I kept the door deadbolt from the inside. The basement didn't vanish, but something happened to the air. It became thin. It became sharp. A golden light began to leak through the cracks in the iron pipes, and the shadow man recoiled, his glass hand shattering into 1,000 shards of soot. The debt is real, the voice said, and every word felt like it was rebuilding my broken bones. The law is holy. The basement is the rightful home of the liar. Ray Miller earned his place here. And Sarah Jenkins, you have earned yours. I bowed my head. I couldn't argue. I didn't want to. I saw my life clearly now, not as a series of bad days or unfortunate choices, but as a deliberate turning away from the light. I had built my own basement, brick by brick, lie by lie. But, the voice continued, and the words shook the very foundations of the pit. There is a ransom. There is a substitute who stepped into the black fire so that the door could be opened. Sarah, do you see the cross? I looked up through the smoke, and there, in the middle of that wasteland of ash, I saw it. It wasn't a pretty, polished piece of jewelry. It was a rugged, blood-stained beam of wood. It stood at the edge of the abyss, and it was the only thing in that entire world that wasn't turning to ash. The ledger of Sarah Jenkins was nailed to that wood, the voice said. The shadow man has no claim, not because Sarah is good, but because the lamb is worthy. Sarah, look at the door. I turned, and there, Right where my kitchen door had been, was a portal of blinding, brilliant white. It wasn't just a door, it was a person. I could see the silhouette of a man standing in the opening, his arms outstretched. He wasn't pushing the darkness back, the darkness was fleeing from him like a whipped dog. "Run, Sarah," the voice whispered. "Don't look back at the warehouse. Don't look back at the ledger. Run to the door." I didn't hesitate. I threw myself forward, crawling through the ash, my lungs burning, my heart screaming. The shadow man tried to grab my ankle again, but the moment his darkness touched the light spilling from the door, he let out a shriek of agony and dissolved into a cloud of flies. I reached the threshold. I felt a hand, a real, warm, scarred hand, grab mine. "I've got you," a voice whispered. It was the kindest thing I'd ever heard. It was the sound of home. I was pulled through. I hit the hardwood floor of my kitchen with a thud that knocked the wind out of me. I gasped, coughing up a mouthful of gray dust that vanished the moment it touched the air of the real world. I was back. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows, glinting off the granite countertops. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. My kitchen was silent. Number 911 calls. No static. No screams. I slowly stood up and walked to the basement door, the real one. I reached out, my hand trembling, and I turned the knob. I pushed it open. It was just a basement. I saw my washer and dryer. I saw the stacks of Christmas decorations. I saw the concrete floor, gray and cold. There was no smoke. There were no black flames. But as I turned to leave, my foot hit something near the bottom step. I looked down. It was my father's old work boot. The one he'd been wearing the day of the fire. It was caked in dried mud and soot. And inside the boot, tucked into the laces, was a small, charred piece of paper. I picked it up. It was a fragment of an old 911 log. Most of it was burned away, but one line was still legible. "Caller, Ray Miller. Message, tell her it's not too late to turn back." I sat on the basement stairs and I wept. Not for the fear, but for the mercy. My father hadn't been calling me to drag me down. He'd been allowed to reach through the veil, one last time, to warn me that the path I was on ended in the dark. The 911 echo wasn't a haunting, it was a rescue mission. Buddy, listen to me. I'm talking to you right now. I'm not a preacher. I'm just a woman who spent 15 years listening to people die on the phone, and one night, I heard my own soul screaming for help. I'm telling you this because the world you see out your window, the cars, the houses, the jobs, the social media, it's a thin, fragile skin over an eternal reality. The basement is real. The shadow man is real. And the ledger is being written right now, every time you choose a lie over the truth, every time you choose yourself over the one who made you. You think you have time. My father thought he had time. He thought he could bury those two boys in the floor of that warehouse and just go on living. But the echo always comes back. Your sins will find you out. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but when that final 911 call comes, and it's coming for all of us, who is going to be on the other end of the line? If you are hearing this, if you are feeling that cold weight in your chest, that's not just anxiety. That's the Holy Spirit of God knocking on the door of your basement. He's showing you the smoke so you don't have to feel the fire. Don't wait. Don't think you can be a better person to fix this. You saw what happened to me. My goodness was nothing. My career was nothing. Only the name of Jesus could break the gravity of the pit. Only his blood can wash the soot off your soul. I'm asking you, right now, wherever you are, in your car, in your living room, at your desk, look at the ledger of your own life. Are you ready for it to be opened? Are you ready to face the witness? Repent. Turn away from the dark. Throw yourself on the mercy of the man at the door. He's standing there right now, reaching out his hand. He's already paid the debt. He's already taken the strike. All you have to do is stop running and take his hand. Folks, don't ignore this. The clock is ticking. The 3:14 is coming for you, too. Don't let your life become nothing but a 9/11 echo in the dark. Turn to him. Now. Before the basement door closes for the last time. I've told you what I saw. I've given you the warning. The rest is between you and the living God. God bless you. And may you find the light before the shadows find you. This story was a reminder that our secrets have a way of echoing into eternity. If this message shook your heart, don't just move on to the next video. Take a moment to pray, to confess, and to seek the Lord while he may be found. The basement is real, but the cross is stronger. Thank you for listening to this confession. Stay in the light.